Hello everyone, welcome to another brand new classes of human physiology. In the last few classes, as you remember, we discussed about like various anatomical part of body, about cells, about ion transport. These classes will see how our body maintains a balance which is called homeostasis, and also we will discuss about different type of cellular disorder. And if the disorder happens, what type of diseases can cause. Hopefully you will enjoy. So what are different contents we will try to cover in this class. So first we will discuss about the homeostasis, and what is homeostasis, what is different type of homeostasis, mostly like positive and negative feedback. Then we will discuss different cellular disorder which can cause in different cell organelles, like in lysosomal disorder, mitochondria related disorder, ribosomal disorder, cell membrane associated disorder, endoplasmic reticulum associated disorder. Okay, hopefully you will like the class. Let us see one by one how it goes. So first we will discuss homeostasis. Homeostasis is maintaining balance of our body, right? Because our body always performs in an optimum state. Even if we sleep, it is continuously performing, it is generating energy, delivering nutrients and glucose to all of our cells, maintaining a steady heart rate, blood pressure, maintaining our neuronal activities, our endocrinal activities. So everything is happening in a balanced state. If there is certain upregulation or downregulation of certain molecules or any pathways or any physiological condition, our body will try to mitigate that condition and retain back the body into the original natural balance. So this process of maintaining the balance is called the homeostasis. As you can see that in normal condition our body is like in a balanced situation, right? It is in a balanced situation, right? And now in case if there is any imbalance happens, right? In case any imbalance happen, what will happen? Body will try to create certain activities to attain the homeostasis. Okay. So in cases of imbalance, that imbalance as a pulse or as a condition will be kind of, it will alert the receptor, or our different type of receptors will get a sense that there is an imbalance condition in our body. Once the receptor sense about that imbalance, it will kind of create a signal, to basically activates the control center. So basically the receptor will receive the information, and as a postman it will deliver the message to the control room or the control center. So once the control center receives that signal, what it will do? It will alert the effector molecule. So a effector type of situation, like maybe a new release of a molecule or new condition will arise in the body, that will minimize that imbalance. So basically the effector molecule will probably secrete some molecule or maybe some hormone, or maybe it will change our certain muscles or certain situation in a way that it will mitigate that imbalance to attain the homeostasis condition or the balance condition. Okay. So let us see how different type of homeostasis happen in our body. Mostly it happens in two different ways, right? So one is like positive feedback loop, and then negative, and the second one is the negative feedback loop. Okay. So mostly it is two category, one is positive and second is negative. So what is basically the positive feedback loop? So if in the last slide you remember, right, how if there is an imbalance happen, it first gets sensed by the it gets sensed by the receptor, and then receptor sends the signal to the control center. So in this case the control center will activate the effector molecule in a way that it further kind of enhances that initial condition. Okay, let's see the kind of the situation how it happens. So you remember during the pregnancy, during the delivery, what it happens, like the uterine contraction happens, baby try to kind of pushes and come out from the uterus. So once baby's head, which is kind of in the lowering situation, it is creating a pressure or force to the uterus, this creates a stimulation kind of situation, this creates kind of a stimulator situation. That is what it does basically, this impulses of the stimulation during the uterine contraction, it affects our brain or the nerve. And once this message goes to our brain, which is the control center, the brain or in the like certain part of our brain, which is mainly the pituitary gland, it secretes an important hormone which is called the oxytocin. So what is happening again, like when the baby is basically pushing during the uterine contraction situation, that stimulation is going by the nerve or the pulse, it is hitting the brain, mainly the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, when it is receiving the signal, it kind of secretes a hormone called oxytocin, and then the oxytocin hormone kind of comes with the blood, it gets circulated in the body, and eventually it further kind of stimulates the uterine muscle to contract, right. So what it causes, once the oxytocin molecule is released, it further stimulates the uterine muscle for contraction, right, and the contraction further helps the baby to push further, and same the mechanism kind of goes in a loop condition. Okay, so this is, you can see, this is a positive feedback loop, right. The body is not trying to prevent the condition, the body in a way is trying to further progress the condition so that baby gets delivered. So this is a positive feedback homeostasis, where you can think that yeah, maybe balance is now removed from that, it is not a natural condition of course, but this is an emergency situation, right. So we need the body, we need the mother to push out the baby, and in this case body cannot maintain the balance, they have to kind of trigger the situation in a way so that the process kind of delivers in a quick manner, and once the process is delivered, body will come back to its normal physiological condition or homeostasis condition. So this way, when body kind of positively triggered that situation is called positive feedback homeostasis. In the contrary, there is one more example, right. If you see, like if there is an injury to blood vessels, what will happen? If there is an injury to blood vessels, it will bleed. In cases of bleeding, it will basically activate like various clotting factor, for example like formation of prothrombin activator will cause change of prothrombin to the thrombin, and then it will further convert fibrinogen to fibrin. So you can see this step by step is eventually causing like the stoppages of the bleeding, right. So when the bleeding happens, various molecular interaction will happen, some chemical reaction will happen, some hormonal reaction will cause, eventually all these cascades of pathway, mainly the protein clotting pathways, they will cause the bleeding to stop. Okay, so this is also an important like feedback mechanism. You can see in detail about the blood coagulation pathway. We will discuss in the after next few class in the blood classes, but just remember this is how the homeostasis work. Some negative feedback homeostasis also we will discuss. For example, if there is like a blood pressure condition happens, right. If there is like a problem in the homeostasis, then maybe our blood pressure may kind of rise. What it will cause? It will send some receptor signal via the nerve impulse, right. Brain will intercept those nerve impulse, and they will cause like the heart blood vessels to kind of have some effect. basically what will happen, there would be like a decrease in the heart rate and the blood pressure. Why? Because there is an increase in the blood pressure due to the disruption of homeostasis. Body needs to kind of reduce the condition. So the heart blood vessels will have a condition of maybe like a vasodilation, right, like maybe a condition of like a vasodilation. So maybe the blood heart rate and the blood pressure will kind of fall, and eventually the BP will go back to the normal condition. Okay, in this way you can see there is a negative feedback loop playing, and our body is trying to maintain the balance. And then another very important negative feedback loop which is like the blood glucose, right. As you see, normally like in our body we have like a certain amount of glucose, right, in the body. So when we eat too much of food, what will happen? When we eat too much of food, the glucose level will go up, right. So once we eat a lot of food, the glucose can go up, and after consuming some amount of glucose for natural activity, body can still left with excess amount of glucose molecule, and that situation is not good, because if too much of excess glucose is present in our body, what can happen? They can kind of start like damaging our organs. They can also increase our fat deposition, and many other problems like inflammatory cascades can come. Our body can become more prone to like bacterial infection. So having high glucose is never good. We will thoroughly discuss about glucose, how the excess glucose can cause diabetes, different type of therapies about diabetes in our endocrine classes. But just remember here, if the glucose gets high, what our body will do? So basically our pancreas has different type of cells, right. So our pancreas has beta cells, also our pancreas has alpha cells. So what this beta cells does? These beta cells basically they secrete a hormone called insulin, right. So what beta cells does? It secretes a hormone called insulin. And now what insulin will do? Insulin will do two things, right. So you remember in our ion transport class we discussed that there is this receptor called GLUT4 receptor, right. In the facilitated diffusion class we have discussed. So this insulin will basically overexpress that GLUT4 receptor, and what it will do? It will increase the delivery of the glucose to the cells, right. So by the expression of insulin or the release of insulin, our body will kind of supply the glucose to the cell. So more amount of glucose will be delivered to the cells, and even after the delivery of the glucose to the cells, if some amount of glucose is still excess, then what will happen? Then insulin will further take that excess glucose, right, and it will convert to glycogen and store in our liver. Okay. So what insulin will do? Insulin has importantly two roles. One is it supplies the glucose to the cell, and second is if some excess glucose is left, it will convert the glucose to glycogen and store in the liver for future use. So you can see how, right, once we eat like more food, it can contribute to like the higher glucose, and whenever there is a higher glucose, these pancreatic cells, this pancreas of ours will secrete from the beta cells, it will secrete like an insulin hormone, and insulin hormone will either supply the glucose to the cell, or it will convert the glucose to glycogen and store in the liver for future use. Okay. So this is one important type of balance insulin creates. Now assume another condition. For example, we are in a fasting condition for 2-3 days and our body is not having too much of food, right. That means our body is now like having lack of glucose. So if we are like in a fasting condition maybe for like 2-3 days, what is happening? Our body is now having very low glucose, right. And now who will save, right? You remember what insulin did? Insulin stored some excess glucose, they converted it into glycogen, So now we have what? We have glycogen reserve in the liver. So what pancreas, again the same cell, right? Again pancreas, pancreatic alpha cells this time, right? Last time it was a beta cell, this time the alpha cell. Alpha cell will secrete another hormone which is called glucagon. And what glucagon will do? Glucagon will basically convert this stored glycogen. Glucagon will convert this stored glycogen which was initially stored in the liver back to glucose, and this glucose will eventually get circulated by the blood and it will try to maintain the glucose homeostasis in our body, right. So hopefully you understood, right. In case of either glucose goes high or low, insulin or glucagon can simultaneously act, or in a specific situation insulin may act, in a specific situation glucagon may act, and it will maintain glucose homeostasis in our body. Glucose is very important for our brain cells also, because in case of prolonged lack of glucose our brain cells can get damaged and we can also go to a situation called coma. Okay, so we should never ignore taking like glucose. Of course doing fast is good for your health, but you should not be kind of ignoring like your morning breakfast or have like a prolonged skip of like between 2 meals. That can always cause like a damage of your glucose regulation in the body, and in continuous run if this type of imbalance persists for a longer period of time, it can cause like a situation called diabetes. Okay, so be very careful with how you take your meals, try to be very regular between the meals. Okay, next we will try to quickly go through various like disorders of different cell organelles, right. We discussed in last few classes, right, how the cell organelles are important. Can you tell what is the role of mitochondria? Yeah, mitochondria is very important in terms of like ATP and energy production, right, and because it maintains like our it supplies the energy for various body function. What about the role of lysosome? Do you remember the role of lysosome? Yeah, you are right, like in the lysosome helps to kind of produce like various sort of like acidic enzyme to destroy like worn out cells, to destroy various like pathogenic bacteria. So lysosome was like a suicidal bag of ours. It maintains like overall like cellular integrity, and it destroys various infection also at times, right. So this type of organelles, like other organelles like nucleus, cytoplasm, all like Golgi body, everything has their own role, you remember. But in cases of any dysregulation, for example like there might be a genetic changes, right, maybe like a genetic mutation in those cell, or maybe some sort of dysfunction happen for a certain organelle. So what diseases can happen, we will briefly discuss. So first one we will discuss about the disorder due to the mitochondrial malfunction. Okay, so mitochondrial diseases are like kind of chronic or long term. It can be like genetic also. In many cases the genetic mitochondrial disorders are inherited. That means like from parents it can go to like daughters, right, and then there are a lot of different type of mitochondrial disease due to this type of genetic reason or other environmental reason. It can affect our various organ, right. You can name any organ because mitochondria are mostly present in all the cells. So like brain, nerve, muscles, liver, lung, kidney, everywhere it can affect. Okay, and it can be like inherited. So that means like mitochondrial disease can originate or initiate, or it can stay during the birth also. So what are different type of mitochondrial disease? You just remember that this all the disease what we will discuss, right, like Alzheimer, muscular dystrophy, diabetes, these can cause for other dysfunction also, right. So many other dysfunction can also cause this type of disease, but the mitochondrial dysfunction also, if it happens, this type of disease can happen. So there might be multiple cause, but mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the important cause, right. So we will not discuss about too much of in detail what is the disease, but just for example mitochondrial malfunctioning can cause Alzheimer disease, and this can affect our like brain memory, right, thinking skills and all. Then it can cause muscular dystrophy, our muscles can become weak, our muscle can loss like a mass, and then we can have like a impaired muscle activity, and it can slowly affect our heart, it can slowly affect our lung and other activity, right. Then this ALS or the amyotropic lateral sclerosis, this is also a like kind of genetic disorder. This can also cause due to like mitochondrial dysfunction, diabetes, cancer. So many of the diseases which are very common nowadays, apart from like genetic disorders also, are some of the diseases that can be caused by mitochondrial malfunction. Okay, and then lysosome malfunctioning. As you remember that lysosome has a very important role to kind of destroy all the worn out like old cellular components or particles, sometimes like different unwanted proteins or maybe even like pathogens. So in cases of lysosomal disorder, what will happen? This type of old torn out cells, and they have lot of glycolipid present, they will not even like get degraded or destroyed. So this type of glycolipids, right, will eventually store in the body. Where they will store? Mostly like they can store in our liver, they can get stored in our spleen. So if these glycolipids, fats, they get stored in this liver and spleen, what it will cause? It will cause like a fatty liver or fatty spleen. So this type of disorder, this is also a genetic disorder, you remember this is also a genetic disorder. If fatty liver and fatty spleen happens due to lysosomal disorder, this is called Gaucher disease. Okay, this is called Gaucher disease. This is a rare genetic disorder. Okay, and progressively the fatty liver and fatty spleen can also cause like a brain related diseases, like it can hamper our motor ability, or it can also cause certain other neuronal damages. Okay, so you can understand lysosome to have a proper function is so important for our body. There are different diseases as we discussed the Gaucher disease. Apart from that, there can be like Fabry disease, there can be Niemann-Pick disease, Pompe disease, Tay-Sachs disease. So these all are different in terms of their condition. It may affect brain, it may affect liver or spleen, some may affect the skeletal heart muscle, some may affect the brain cells, but these all are related to the lysosome malfunctioning. Okay. So next is ribosome malfunction. So what is ribosome important for? Yeah, it is important because it is the house of protein synthesis, right. So ribosome related diseases which are also called like rhizomopathies. If there is a dysregulation or alteration in the structure of components of ribosome, this type of disease can happen, right, and it will hamper the protein production. So what are the associated disease? Maybe like Diamond-Blackfein anemia, like a type of anemia, right. If the ribosome is dysfunction, maybe it may cause like anemia, because it may cause like a improper synthesis of this type of hemoglobin, other protein, right, and different type of genetic disease like 5q syndrome also can happen, right, and this type of diseases can kind of affect various part of our body. Mostly they cause like anemia, right. Other type of disease like SDS syndrome, it can be like the dyskeratosis cognitia, the DC type of disease. These are like some sort of like neutropenia disease, genetic disease. It can cause like fibrosis, bone marrow failure. So you can see like lot of different sort of diseases happen. We are not discussing too much in detail, but just remember these some diseases which were very uncommon few years before, with like growing environmental changes, lot of pollution, lot of over excessive use of growth factors, lot of excessive use of like chemical fertilizers, right, mainly environment pollution and our lifestyle changes. These diseases are becoming increasingly more and more prevalent, and especially in the early ages, like lot of cases we can hear nowadays that these are happening in cases of child and baby, and these are becoming very serious. And main problem is many of these cases there is almost no treatment available till date, and even if there are certain treatments available, the treatments cost are too high. So in some cases the treatments may cost, even like a single injection of certain treatment can go like over 1 crore rupees. So you can understand it becomes so difficult for certain family, for their babies to suffer, to see that they are suffering from this disease, but they don't have any option to treat them. Okay. So go through all these detail briefly, of course, about the disease. Some disease we may cover in certain classes, like for example Alzheimer, Parkinson will cover during our neuro classes, but mostly, and diabetes will cover in our endocrine classes, right. Some disease will thoroughly like cover. Okay. So endoplasmic reticulum related malfunctioning can cause like cystic fibrosis. This can also hamper our lung, mostly like lung, also sometimes the digestive organ. Then other diseases also can happen, right. Cell membrane related malfunctioning can also happen, right. Is like different type of like dysfunction can cause like irregular like development or like use of this cholesterol. So maybe in cases of this type of dysregulation, the bad cholesterol level can go high in the body, right. And if the bad cholesterol, you know, right, there are like two different type of cholesterol in our body, good and bad, right. And good cholesterol try to mitigate the bad effect of this bad cholesterol. So what will happen if the bad cholesterol goes high? They can cause maybe clogging of the blood arteries, vessels, and it can also cause like heart attack, right. And other infectious disease like HIV, Shingella, these also can happen due to the cell membrane malfunction. Okay, so different diseases again. So all these showed like how different diseases can happen if like certain organelles disorder can cause in our body. So this is today's activity. Okay, so do something heavy work, right. Maybe you can jump, you can run, and then slowly try to touch your heart to measure your heart rate, like how fast your heart is beating. And once you do some exercise, after doing the exercise you sit, then try to relax, and from start to last you try to measure your heart rate and try to kind of judge that how your body is kind of increasing or decreasing your heart rate with the whole process. What is the main goal of the heart rate decrease or increase? Because when you do the work, your body may need like lot of oxygen, and to deliver lot of high oxygen your heart rate may increase. So you can do this task and try to see how it works. Hopefully you enjoyed today's class of homeostasis, where we discuss about lot of like how the body maintains like balance, right. Apart from that we discuss different like disorders of like cell organelles, some diseases also we discussed. Go through all those briefly. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask us. We will also do lot of live session. Please send your queries. Okay, again thank you very much for attending today's class, and we will meet you again in another new class of human physiology. Thank you again.